Guys, are you happy so far away over there? It's good. All right. Anyway, we're on. Okay. So the last thing we spoke about was Chayav Adam Lomar Bishvili Nivra Olam. A person has to say the world was created for me. We said Olam comes from the word Helam, which means concealment, which means everyone is supposed to say that the original Tzimtzum, which created reality, was made for him. Why? In order to refine it and purify it. In other words, that the whole business of a Jew is that the entire world is there for him to fix. And that's why, this is just a review of what we said last time, this is why a person is made with 248 limbs and 365 sinews, which comes to the number 613, because the whole Hishtalshalus, everything in creation, is made in this number 613, and it's made in that way because it's made for man to be able to affect every single aspect of it, bar none. So the whole creation is literally designed for us to fix, and that's why it parallels our exact powers to fix. Our fixing powers. Okay. So we said that the soul is called Chevel Nachlasu, it's the rope of our inheritance. And this idea of this soul, this rope, which connects us to godliness, we're going to take you from here. The line starts, Gam Ba'anashama. Yeah. It starts with the word Gam. And then go to the end of the line. V'chevel zeh, the neshama, har miskasha belukus. This rope of the soul is connected to God. So I believe we said basically the whole idea of this rope is that it's a rope twisted with 613 strands. And this represents the soul itself, which has these 613 powers. So this rope, why is it called a rope, the soul? Besides the fact that it has all these strands and it's a compound of powers, it is like a rope, just like a rope, that one side of it is tied above, and the other side of it is tied below. Rosho Hasheni, its second head, second side. And in this way, there's a connection to become as one. So notice that we're even though we've come pretty far down the Seder Ishtalshalos all the way into this physical world, we're tied with a rope straight to godliness. And that's what's good about the rope. It joins two things which are in distant places. So it is with the rope of the soul. One part of it is tied above. And he gets specific over here. This is the connection of what's called the lower hay. In Hashem's name, Yud Kei Vav Kei. So this that we're connected above, His kashrus os hey tata ba hey ba gimel osius Yud Kei Vav. So it's the connection of the lower hay to the three higher letters Yud Kei Vav. He doesn't mention it.
It says, now say,
to be like one, to be as one.
And what does it mean that, where are we connected to this Osei?
Right, so it comes out, sort of, we are the Os Hey. In other words, this is the connection. The Os Hey of Hashem's name is, the lower Hey is Malchus, right? It's like this part which is designed to go into the worlds. So the whole concept is that we're connecting the lower Hey with the higher three letters of Hashem's name, which are above Malchus, which represents godliness itself. Right? Yud, Kei, Vav, in general, is Chochmah, Bina, and the Midos. That's still the aspect of Hashem which comes before His mouth, which expresses things outwardly and creates. So it's like the body of Hashem Himself. It's still pure godliness. And so when He starts to create, He speaks. So that, we always talk about the metaphor of speech, that Hashem created the world with speech to indicate that just like speech comes out of the person and becomes a separate entity, so too, so to speak, the world comes out of Hashem, and that's when it starts to be a creation, something other than Him. But nonetheless, even in the state of otherness, we're connected with this rope of God back to sort of the mothership there. V'rosho echad kashulamata. Okay, so yeah. So it's kashrus os hey tata by gimel osios yud kei vav. V'roshu achad kashulamata v'hu ba'aros haneshama mislaveshes baguf ha'adam lahachayosam. And the bottom head is connected below, which is the shine of the soul, which is invested into the body of man to enliven him. Yeah. The artist, like the ray of the soul. So this is what it means, Yaakov, the rope of his inheritance, the gam madregas hanamuchos, that even in the lower levels, shehem bechinas ikvayim, they're the soul, they're the heels. That's what it says Yaakov, chevel nachlas. So Yaakov is our father, but he also, the word Yaakov was the word heel. So it's really indicating heel here. Even in the heels, the lowest level, hini aidei chevel temshama. Nonetheless, even if you're in the lowest level, you're the heel. Through the rope of the soul, harehem kshurim ba'atzmos. You're still connected with the essence. But kiviyachol shehem, which means to say, it's as if they are the neshamas Yisrael, the souls of the Jewish people. Nachlaso shalmayla. We're like the inheritance of God above. We're His inheritance. Which really means kiviyachol. Which really means that Yaakov, the heels, are the rope, are connected to the rope of His inheritance. Here, His inheritance goes on God. Right? We are basically, even the heels of the Jewish people, the lowest part of the Jewish people, we are connected with the rope. We are His inheritance. And through this, we are connected with the ultimate state of connection. So this that we spoke about before, the denial of God, God forbid, or avera, or a sin, shibakares chas v'shalom. Does this sound familiar? It's yesterday's Tanya. Because we talks about the Indian of kares, cutting you off from God and everything. We're going to get to it in a second. So this notion of denying God, or an avera, which is obligates a person kares, which means to be cut off, chas v'shalom. Halohem no'gim le'etzem hiskashrus. Don't they affect your essential connection to God? In other words, if you're denying Hashem, if you do a sin which the Torah itself says you're cut off, isn't this to affect your essential ability to connect? Hainu b'klalus hiskashrus shem etzem haneshama ve'etzem hanefesh, which is your whole general notion of being connected with God, your very soul and neshama and nefesh. Va'al derech teksiv, as it says, ki avanoseichem hayu mavdilim beinechem lebein elokeichem. It says your sins separate you between you, or separation between you and your God. The elokeichem perush elokah shelachem. And what does it mean, you're God? It means you're the God of you. Hainu elokusha b'neshama. It means the godliness in your soul. So when you sin, it creates a separation, a boundary between you and your own, and the godliness in your very own soul. That's what it means you're a God. Not just our collective God, but the godliness which is inside of you, thereby cutting you off from your connection to God. Binyanim elu, Harehem nogim b'chlalus iskashrus. And these things, these particular types of sins, denying God, God forbid, and a sin which is punishable by kares, cutting off, they're obviously connected with a general connection. You get cut off. But then there's a question here, basically, because we know, and we spoke about it earlier in this chapter, that the essence of the soul, nothing can cover over. We spoke about before, when can there be the nefesh Bahamas, when can the animal soul hide and conceal and put this ruach shtus, this spirit of folly, and block the message from the godly soul? Only on those aspects of the godly soul which are relevant to being clothed into something, into a state of concealment. To conceal something, you have to wrap yourself around it. And aspects of the soul which are contracted, the panemius parts of the soul, since they get contracted, so they're subject to being wrapped around and blocked. But we said before that the makiv powers of the soul, since they don't lend themselves to being contracted, then also they can't be blocked. So the essence of the soul, we said, is not susceptible to the ruach shtus. That's why there's something, part of you, something, this essence of your soul, which ultimately cannot be, tampered with by this ruach shtus. And that's why we sort of set a proof that even a person who's the lowest of the low, and he's walking around all day sinning, when it comes a real test of his faith, then he will rise to the challenge suddenly, because that aspect of him which is the essence cannot be covered over by the ruach shtus. So when it comes clear to him that he's going to get cut off, there's a part of him which cannot be fogged over, and it appears. So now we're saying basically the situation where a person seems like when he denies God or something of this sort, he would be cut off. It creates an essential disconnect, from his soul. And therefore, and therefore, when it comes something that all of a sudden brushes up with his general essential connection of his soul to God, that this could actually totally disconnect him from God, like we said, those particular sins. The canal, and as we said before, the Ish Yisrael, that a Jewish person, Eino Rotze B'shum Ofen, he does not want in any way, Ve'einu Yachol, and he's not able, Chas v'Shalom, Lipar Melokus, to be disconnected from godliness. It goes against his essential nature. Therefore, suddenly, it's felt by him this matter. In other words, in the moment of truth, at those particular averas, when he realizes he's going to be cut off from his essential connection, then it arouses this part of him which is not contracted, not susceptible to being fogged over. And at the moment of truth, he jumps up and passes the test, because this is something which is relevant to his essential connection. So all the things which he deems not relevant to his essential connection, those he feels like he can still be just as Jewish as he was before, as we said, and therefore he'll sin. When it comes to a point where he realizes his essential connection is going to be severed, so he can't be fooled by that anymore, and these sort of makiv powers of his soul come alive. But in other sins, God forbid, she'enam bikares, which are not punishable by being cut off, harehem nimim pratim. So what these are particular strands of the rope. V'lechein einam nirgashim etzlo kol kach, and therefore he doesn't feel it so much. It's a big rope, 613 strands. So if someone's going to come along and say, if you do that, I'm going to cut the rope, your whole connection is severed, he'll do anything in his power not to do that. He'll even give his life. But if someone's going to just take one little strand of 613 strands, he doesn't even feel that such a thing is bothering him. He's totally connected. He says, I'm just as Jewish as I was before. Little does he know, he's 1/613th less Jewish than he was before. But he doesn't feel that, because his essential connection, he still feels like he's rooted to the rope above. Right? And that's why a person can feel just as Jewish as they were before, because their essential connection is not necessarily being cut off. But of course, there is a certain aspect of themselves which is totally cut off from God. That rope, that strand rather, of the rope, which is their connection to God from that particular power of their soul, is cut off. It's a mini kares. Because a piece of the rope is being cut off, and there's a major disconnect there. Part of him is being essentially disconnected from God. It's just that he doesn't feel it. Because in general, he's still connected. And this is what the explanation why a person can do other sins and not feel like he's less Jewish. And the Ruach Shtus, the folly, has its way with him because it's not affecting his essential connection. Nimi, no, is a strand. The particular strands. Vagam Diba Avro Alachas mitzvahs Havaya Asher Tziva La Sosan Be'enu Ose. And even though he transgresses one of the mitzvahs that Hashem commanded to do it and he doesn't do it, or he does one of the mitzvahs that Hashem said, Asher Tziva Hashem Lebilti La'asosan, or he does one of the things that Hashem says not to do, in other words, the positive or the negative mitzvahs, so even though by doing this, he does cut off that particular strand, and as we just mentioned, that little strand which got cut off, okay, essentially he's still connected because there's other strands, but in that particular part of his connection with God, it's a complete kares. He's cut off in that aspect of his soul. And not only that, but he starts to affect a weakening of the general rope. When you start cutting individual strands of a rope, your general connection is also weaker. Not only do you lose that one particular place of connection with God, and that power of yourself is now totally in the klippas, and it's no longer receiving its godly life force and sustenance from godliness, but in general, when you weaken one piece, it weakens the whole rope. But nonetheless, with all that being true, since they're only particular strands, he really doesn't feel it all that much. And this is the explanation why basically Jews can go around in a state of sin and mamish in their heart of hearts feel that they are not doing anything wrong. They're just connected to God, they're just as Jewish as the guy next to them. There's no difference. He says, because in this, the midos of the animal soul, they are able to hide and conceal al hamidos de nefesh elokis, on the godly midos of the godly soul, as we said before, because it's not a total cutoff. So you're not tampering with the essential connection, right? You're just tampering with the sort of revealed powers, as it were, because the essential connection, so long as there's any strand left, is still holding on. Until there's a kares, until there's a kafira, a denial of God, and a complete cutting off the rope, you're essentially connected. So once a person is essentially connected, then that aspect of his soul, which is not vested into any vessels, it's not contractible, it's happy. In other words, it's not going to jump out and scream and throw off the shackles of the slavery of the Nefesh Bahamas because there's no particular need. He's still connected. But what can happen is that the parts of the godly soul which are contracted, the midos means measurements also. All the parts which are measured and are coming in for the particular purpose of refining the animal soul, as we said, that's why they've been sent in the world, and instead they're being devoured by the animal soul, they're just remaining in gullus, and that spirit of folly has its effect on them. Because they're contracted, because it's not an essential break. No, a husk is something else. A husk is like on.
Here he says that it's like.
Oh, you mean the klippas? Oh. The strand is not the klippas. The strand is the mitzvahs. The strands are the mitzvahs, and the idea that the strands get cut, that's the klippas. The klippas, basically, the job of the klippa is that disconnects, basically. It stands as like a wall in between you and your Father in heaven. So all of a sudden you were connected in this rope, and you decide to cut that rope. So that's a klippa, basically. It's a shell which blocks the light of God from flowing into you. And anytime a person does an avera chas v'shalom, or doesn't do something they're supposed to do, so one of those ropes is blocked off. The only thing is, why don't you jump into action and fix it? You're being slowly, basically cut off from God, because essentially there's still some strands left. And so therefore, since you don't all of a sudden, it doesn't occur to you that you're being cut off until someone's like, guess what? And then all of a sudden you'll give your life to have that not happen. But the rationale behind all this thing is, wake up. If you would give your life to not be cut off, so you should equally give your life to not be slowly cut off, piece by piece, because it's also called being cut off. It's also weakening the whole rope, let alone the fact that it's cutting off the individual parts one at a time. And that's what he says in the Tanya yesterday. He says, not only is it a ruach shtus, but it's a ruach shtus to think there's a difference between a serious mitzvah and a light mitzvah. What's the difference if you're cutting yourself off with this strand or this strand? What's the difference really if you're cutting yourself off the whole way or just a little piece? It's a little death is also called death. So it's only the ruach shtus which makes you have the delusion that you're just as connected as you were before, now that you're busy severing the rope from all angles.
This is the battle with the Yitzhak.
This is it. The idea being that when it comes to the midos, there the animal soul has its way with you, which means you don't feel the light and life force of godliness. So finally he's like answered the question from the beginning. How in the world could a Jew sin in the first place? Our whole life force is from godliness, and it's in our nature of our godly soul to only know godliness. Our soul doesn't want to eat or sleep or do anything but mitzvahs and Torah all day long. That's its nature, like a flame constantly goes up. It's built in. So how can we ever sin? So it's explained to you, the parts of your soul are susceptible to this because they were sent down into a realm of klippas. It was their job to fix them, but because they're contracted, it can have its way with them, and therefore a person can sin. And this is again the spirit of folly, which covers over and conceals the light of truth, which makes it so you do not feel the godly light. And so it can be, God forbid, that a person will go down from one state to the other, being pushed off after pushed off. In other words, it's a slippery slope, because once the rope gets weaker, so you feel it less and less and less. To the point that a person can come to do something truly prohibited. And all this is from the ruach shtus. So really what it comes down to is the union of feeling, right? The union of feeling. That's what is the difference between falling prey to this or not. If you feel a sensitivity towards ruchnias, towards spirituality, then you'll right away run away from it, like we said, like you'll run away like you're running for your life. But if a person gets coarse and he starts to not have a feeling for it, and it doesn't bother him one way or the other if he's going to sleep through Shacharis, Mincha, and Mariv. It's just okay. Like I know, I shouldn't have done it, but it doesn't really care. When you get into that situation, you're in a dangerous situation. There's a Baal Shem Tov story like this. The Baal Shem Tov, of course, had this. No offense, by the way, to our sleeper ins. Just on the top of my head. Anyway, so the Baal Shem Tov, of course, used to have a general principle that you can learn something from everything. That's the whole Hashgacha Pratis concept that he brought into the Judaism, into the world. Everything is divine providence, everything, even a leaf falling off a tree. So his students would go around practicing this, basically. Everything they would see, they would figure out what the lesson of life is in that thing. And one day they went out without the Baal Shem Tov. I guess he had other business to attend to, and they went traveling through the world there somewhere. And their way back, they came upon a bunch of priests, basically of another religion, carving out a cross from the frozen lake. And they saw this, and their hearts fell, basically, because they said, like, this is like a terrible thing. And here, we know everything else, Hashgacha Pratis, and we're supposed to figure out, what we're supposed to learn from this. What can I possibly learn from this? This is like a crazy event that we happen to come upon in our lives. And they rushed home to the Baal Shem Tov, and they asked him what to do about it. It's a famous story. And he said, the lesson is very simple. He said, as soon as you get cold with the mitzvahs, then you're one step away from heresy. As long as the water is warm, okay, you're not gonna. As long as you're excited, as long as you feel something ruchni, a spirituality, you're sensitive to spirituality, so you're okay. The second you get cold, the second you get all excited about the hockey and the sports and the whatever, the politics, you get cold for spiritual things. You don't realize how dangerous that is. The second you get cold, you're a step away from total heresy. You can carve a cross out of it. Anyway, this is the concept. The difference which is going to save us is to be a warm Jew, to experience what it means to have a feeling for spirituality. Okay. Dechi is like to be pushed off. Dechi al dechi is just like an expression. One state after the next of being pushed off. Any other words? What'd you say? Everything's such kacha pratis. Kitzer. Yamshich. So he goes on. The ruach shtus mechase rak al midos the nefesh halukis, that the spirit of folly can have its power only on the midos of the godly soul. V'lo al atzmus, but not on the essence, because in the essence, all of a sudden it comes in jeopardy. It will come down. And it will throw off the ruach shtus instantaneously. It will not allow itself to be completely cut off. The etzimis kashrus and the essential connection. So the ruach shtus only has a certain level of power over you, over the midos. Okay. Hey, the final chapter of Basi Legani. First mimer, at least we're going to learn. This is kind of a big event here. V'hinei kashem sheyesh hatiyah lamata min hadas. So all this time we talked about the word shtus, we were talking about the leaning below intelligence. Remember we said that the middle road was intelligence and seichel and understanding. And if you're going to go into shtus mode, it means you're dipping and you're leaning below it into the state of folly, and it creates a whole ruach shtus, as we said. But just like there's a turning below das, shunuku b'shem shtus de klippa, and that's called shtus, folly, but on the side of evil, the side of klippa. Hine kamo kein, so too, yeshno hatiyah lamayla min hadas. There's also turning above intellect. It's also called shtus. Who shtus de kedusha, right? This is called shtus de kedusha. And like I said, this was the will, as it were, of the previous Rebbe, and it was the leading banner and instruction for us in our whole generation, the Rebbe's generation. And it comes down to this. It's all leading up to these two words, shtus de kedusha. This is really what the whole mimer is going to explain to us. Just like there's a leaning below das. Okay, so shtus de kedusha. Okay, so what does it mean to turn above intellect? And now all of a sudden it's also called shtus, but it's craziness for God. So the sages said, Amru alav al Rabbi Yehuda bar Ilai, who is our neighbor. Yeah, we passed by Rabbi Yehuda bar Ilai on our way to everywhere, out of Sfas. So they said regarding him, Shahayanotel bad shel hadas, he took a bunch of what's hadas again? Myrtle, yes. Umerakeh lifnei akala, and he would dance in front of the kala. Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak merakid al tlas, And then his buddy tried to outdo him. Rabbi Shmuel, but Rabbi Yitzchak, he would dance with 3. What does it mean 3? Shlosh badi. With 3 bundles of myrtle. Zorek achas u'makabel achas. We call this juggling. He would throw one and catch one. Rashi says. Right? So this is how these guys would misameach the chassan and kala. The kala. Amar Rab Zeira ka machsif lan saba. So Rab Zeira comes along. He was a pretty stern fellow. He said, this guy, these sages, they're embarrassing us. You know, the sages were these intense creatures that walked the earth. They were like these hooded, sages and mystics. And they had to keep their kavod very strong. They were totally separated from the regular people. The Talmidei Chachamim, they knew the Kol HaTorah Kula. And all of a sudden this guy's juggling in front of the Kala. He said, what are you doing? This is like disgracing the honor of the Talmidei Chachamim. Shemezalzel b'kavod Talmidei Chachamim. You're embarrassing the glory and the honor of the Talmidei Chachamim. V'noeg kalos rosh ba'atzmo. You're conducting yourself frivolously, Rashi says. To embarrass, Aramaic.
So
Mizalz is also embarrassed. It's a Hebrew. Rashi. This is when he puts in the parentheses. He puts Rashi's pshat, perush from the Gemara. Ki nach nafshe. When Rabbi Yehuda bar Ilai passed away, afsik amura denora bein didei lakuli alma. So a huge pillar of fire surrounded his graves. It was afsik. It separated Amuda Denora, the pillar of fire, bein didei, between him, lakula alma, to the rest of the world. V'chule. That's a pretty serious level of guy. So Amar Rab Zera, Rab Zera thought twice about his statements to them. He says, Ahanile shute l'saba. He said, you know what? I was wrong. It helped him, the shute de saba. In other words, this shute, now what does it mean? Shute looks pretty close to the word shtus, right? So he says he helped him, this shtus of the sage. Now what does it mean? Shute, you can say a few things. Shut shel hadas, right? Which means, one thing you could say is like a branch of myrtle. Shemarakibo, that's what Rashi says, shute. In other words, it means a branch of myrtle. But Amrele, some people said, shtusei de saba. Someone said, don't say that it was a branch, but rather shtusei de saba. In other words, his shtus helped him because it created that when he died, a pillar of fire separated him from the rest of the world. Shamisnagi kishota. He was conducting himself like a shota. Shota is a fool, a person who's a crazy person. So it says this ridiculous behavior of this sage, it made him greater than us. Not that he was embarrassing us and lowered him. It made him greater than the rest of us. Saba means the old man, like the sage. Amrila, and some people said shitase l'saba. Some people said the shita of Saba. Shitaso minhago. Like we said, there's a shita. Some people go in this shita, some people go in that shita. It's a sort of leaning. Right? It all comes from the same word. And the idea that the shtus, so this leaning towards above intellect, being like a crazy person for Kedusha, going in the road, say, excuse me, are you Jewish, basically? The whole concept of miftzoim, everything that basically our generation is built on, this notion of not just sitting and learning Torah and doing things normally, but being very not normal, taking a family and a holy, family with children and sending them to who knows where to go and establish a big menorah in the city square of Zimbabwe. This is not normal. This is a crazy thing to do. And this is the whole generation. That's what I'm saying. This Maimah really sort of set the tone of everything the Rebbe decided to do with us. And he says, the shtus zu harihi lamayla min hadas. This type of shtus is not shtus of the ruach of shtus that we talked about before. This is a shtus which is above intellect. Shu madrega gavoa v'nifla v'ma'od ma'od. It's a level which is high and wondrous very, very much. And now he explains why this was accomplished specifically by a wedding. In other words, we didn't see this contact from them all the time. We saw this contact when he was masameach the kala. He said the ish v'isha, because a man and a woman, harizachu, if they merit, harishchina shroya b'neihem, that the shechina dwells between them in their home. Where do we see that? The ish who eish yud, the isha who eish he. Yeah, it's a classic one. When you get ready to get married, we'll sit you down and tell you this all over again. But it says ish has the word eish in it with a yud, and isha has the word eish in it with a he.